Well, good morning, everyone. It is 8 o'clock, and it's my pleasure to introduce the introducer of our speaker, as I normally do. For those of you who have not met me, I'm Dr. Kim Williams, and Chairman of Medicine here at University of Louisville. And we are very pleased this morning to have a superstar in the realm of infectious disease who's actually going to talk to us about leadership. I can personally attest to the fact that he's an incredibly good leader. Because when I took over as chair, I was introduced to our speaker, Dr. Aronoff, as someone who had been chair of medicine at a neighboring university for about 6 months, I think. And so we developed a bond, really, of having someone we could rely on to talk to each other about issues and as they come up, chairs, and you never know where the issues are going to come from. So it's really good to know that he's had my back and vice versa if they ever needed anything. So that really is a testament to leadership, and we have a lot to learn from him today. But to do the real introduction, I'm going to introduce you to Dr. Forrest Arnold, who is, of course, a professor of medicine and chief of the Division of Infectious Disease here at University of Louisville, who will actually do the full introduction of Dr. Aronoff. Thank you, Forrest.
Thank you kindly. I'm going to introduce David Aronoff this morning. He has a very long CV, but I just want to emphasize what a great person he is, first of all. And the most prestigious thing is not even on his CV, and that is he is the nephew of George Aronoff, our George Aronoff. And so George Aronoff, as you know, is the chief of nephrology for 2 decades. And so he was a great stalwart here at the university, and he's walking in those steps. Dr. Aronoff has degrees in microbiology from IU and the University of Kent in the United Kingdom, and he got his MD degree at Tufts University. He then was Vanderbilt bound for internship and internal medicine residency and ID fellowship. That was back when the internships were not just the first year of residency, and it was uphill both ways. So we did that. While he was doing his 2-year fellowship in infectious diseases, he did a 2-year postdoc in clinical pharmacology. Followed that up with another 2-year postdoc in pulmonary and critical care medicine. So his interest in leadership, I'm sure, has spanned decades. But the first thing that I noted was in 2013, he was in the academic leadership program at Vanderbilt. And his CV is filled with opportunities, multiple manuscripts and grants that he's obtained. And I don't want to minimize those, but I also don't want to take up his time as he speaks to us about listening. So I'm going to yield the floor to him, and please welcome David Aronoff.
Thanks so much. That's awesome. Thanks. Can everybody hear me okay? Great. Oh gosh, it's great to see everybody, and thank you for being here. I really want to extend my heartfelt thanks to Dr. Arnold and Dr. Williams. It has been a great pleasure to get to know Dr. Williams, as we've both been relatively new to our positions as chair. I'm going to get started in my talk. I'm going to try to make sure that we have time for questions afterwards. And with that, here's the outline of what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to start with some disclaimers that I think are important to put my talk into perspective in terms of understanding my perspective. I'll talk about my own privileges and the lenses through which I lead and conduct myself. And then I'll share with you 10 lessons in leadership that I've learned since becoming the division director of infectious disease back in 2013, and then chair of medicine in 2022, inclusive of time that you all know about, which was the leading through the pandemic. And then I'll follow with some brief conclusions and hopefully have time for discussions. Now, for those of you who either online or here want to tune out or fall asleep or whatever, this is what I'm going to talk about. These 10 lessons in leadership that I'll discuss. That leadership can be learned, that we need to be on a path of continuous self-improvement, that getting help from others matters, and that as leaders, we need to be comfortable being in situations where we feel uncomfortable. That diversity in all ways is really important, that self-care matters. And as Dr. Arnold alluded to, a lot of what I'll talk about is listening and focusing on how we build our own character as effective leaders. And I'll finish with some conversation around culture. Building a positive culture is, I think, one of the most important aspects of leadership, and then assembling great teams of people. So as Dr. Arnold mentioned, I have some connections here to the U of L, more than I can even say in a few slides. One of which is that my late father's younger brother, his kid brother, George, was here for a long time, from 1987 to 2014. He's now living in Denver, Colorado, and has 4 grandchildren there, and was on faculty here as division director for over 20 years. But maybe you don't know that my first publication ever came out of a visiting rotation here as a 4th-year medical student working in dermatology with Dr. Jeff Callan, where he was so generous with his time and taught me how to write, period, and got me excited about writing up medical knowledge. And so my first paper ever on my CV or in PubMed, it came out of the University of Louisville. And then many of you here know Dr. Doster. Ryan was a fellow with us at Vanderbilt, did his PhD in a co-mentored lab with me and Dr. Jennifer Gaddy. And I'm just so excited to see that he's on faculty here, and it's been great to reconnect. So some disclaimers. Number one, I think leadership and we as people never stop developing, and I'm definitely a work in progress. And it's quite possible that the things I feel about leadership today will change over time. And I don't claim to be a better leader than anyone else. I'm trying to be the best leader that I can personally be. And I think that there are a lot of people, including many or most of you in this room, who are trying to do the best that we can at what we do. But I also think it's really important to know about, not only from your perspective where the message is coming from, but for me to check my own privileges and biases as I talk about my path to leadership, because I have privileges. I have power from my position as a chair, but I also have privileges that are based on things like my race and my ability and my gender and my sexuality and my socioeconomic status and my high degree of education. And the fact that I can walk into many, many rooms and feel safe and not threatened. And that's not something that I share with everybody. And so that, I think, is important to understand who you're hearing from today, and for me to recognize who I am and some of the things that have helped me get to the positions I'm in today. I also think, and this is something that also people see in a lot of comic books around superheroes, is that we get powers and we can use those powers for good or we can use them for evil. And I think we all try to use, particularly as physicians and people in medicine, to use the privileges and power we have to do the best that we can. And Dr. Okorafor, who is a writer of Afrofuturism and science fiction, I think said that very well. So why do I enjoy leadership? Well, I really like helping other people succeed. I think that gives me a lot of excitement to see particularly large groups of people accomplish ambitious goals. I also think it's important to be an advocate and a representative at the table where decisions are made. You know, people say sometimes that if you're not at the table, you may well be on the menu. And I think it's important for us to recognize that advocacy and being at the table is really important. I also learned a lot during the pandemic, being in the Division of Infectious Diseases, about the importance of growth that can occur if we don't shy away from challenges and we run towards the fires, we run towards the difficult circumstances. And hopefully, at the end of the day, when our careers are finished, we've left a legacy of good, even understanding that there'll be things that we do that turn out badly, there'll be mistakes we make or errors, but the balance sheet at the end, hopefully, will be a legacy of good. So with that, I'm going to turn and talk about some lessons in leadership. And each of these lessons could, I think, be a lecture in and of themselves. I'll talk at the end about building teams. And I recently gave a talk to some graduate medical education learners at Indiana about building teams. The point being that this is insufficient. I just want to tell you some of the things that have resonated with me as a growing and developing leader. I tried to put some references on these slides. Of course, this talk is being archived, but also I'm happy to share my slides with anybody because the font I had to use for many of these references is tiny, and so it may be hard to see. So lesson number one is that I don't buy the idea that people are born to lead. There may be some people who are just naturally gifted at having leadership skills, but I also would say that each of us leads something, whether it's ourselves or our families or communities at church or at school or at work. And we can learn to be better leaders. And we do that a lot through our experience, but we can do it through taking classes on leadership, through having archetypes of mentors. I've had lots of people in my life who don't even recognize the impact they've had in my life as leaders just by virtue of being present. And I've gotten to see them and learn. Members of my family. George Aronoff is a great example of somebody who, as I was growing up in the field of medicine, could look at as a leader in academic medicine and aspire to be a good leader in academic medicine. And so everywhere. I also think it's incumbent upon us to spend time improving our skills. And one of the things that maybe is simple, but I really think as human beings, our superpower is our ability to think. And when we think, when we put time into thinking, it changes our behavior, and it's our behavior that then affects the results that we see. And thinking is something that is infinite in terms of what we can think about, and it's driven by what we get exposed to. And that's why I think it's really important along the lessons of diversity that we expose ourselves to lots of ideas, lots of things. We try different things in our career because they inform our thinking, our behavior, and the results that we achieve. So we should expand our thinking, and that helps us to reimagine problems and think about solutions. And it puts us in a position where we're not the lid on the thoughts about what is possible. So if we're serving a community of people who have a problem to solve, and somebody raises their hand and says, what about this? We don't immediately shut that down and say, no, that's not possible. Can't do that. I don't see how that would be a thing. As leaders, we need to think more about maybe there is a way to do that. How could we aspire to do that? Let's go with your idea. Let me think about that a bit more. And along that lines, for me personally, it's been really important to understand that the things that I could know outweigh the things I do know by a lot. And the ignorance I have about the world outweighs the knowledge I have about the world. And I need to be okay with that. And I also need to be okay with being wrong. It's a very special aspect of being human, how awesome we are at being wrong about things. Those of you who do research know that many of the questions we ask turn out to be wrong, or in retrospect, dumb. Some of the things that we ask our patients to do turn out to be wrong. Sometimes that causes harm, sometimes it does not. But I do think that we should display some equanimity and equipoise and not get too excited and high about the things that we consider victories and not get too low about our failures, because in equal measure, they help us. And then lastly, I think a key to me learning is being humble and not having hubris and not feeling like, oh, I already know that. I'm an infectious disease expert. You can't teach me about infections. That right? So it's the same way about leadership, of learning from every person around us and how we can get better. Now, as Ryan Doster knows, I'm a music fan. I really enjoy jazz. And one of the things I like about jazz is I think it teaches us a lot about leadership. And Art Tatum, who was a very famous jazz pianist, said something, which is that there is no such thing as a wrong note. And it really is about how we respond to things that we think are wrong. And Miles Davis probably built on this a little better when he said, it's not the note you play that's the wrong note. It's the note you play afterwards that makes it right or wrong. And there are some very famous footage of Miles Davis playing with Herbie Hancock where Herbie plays a terribly wrong chord in the middle of a song, a performance. And you watch Miles, who's playing trumpet over the top of it, stop and listen and change gears, completely changing what he's been playing night after night after night into something incredibly beautiful. And Herbie Hancock talks a lot about that and about how that really taught him about this exact idea. And I think for us as leaders, that's important. I also think reading is fundamental. This slide has a bunch of books that I've read that I think have helped inform my approach to leadership. It's not an inclusive list of books, but I think it's very, very good. Veranda Montgomery, who is a botanist and a woman of color, wrote a tremendous book about how we can draw analogies from tending our plants to mentoring and leading. And that sort of analogous thinking can be very potent in terms of learning how to be a better leader. The book, Yes to the Mess, is all about how jazz and leadership are similar to each other. But it's hard to do all of this in a vacuum. And I've benefited a lot. When I was at Vanderbilt, one of the things that was really important there is that there was really a culture of mentoring and coaching leadership. And I connected with an executive leadership coach who I've been in a mentor-mentee relationship with now for almost a decade. And I can talk with her about difficult things I'm having to deal with, or get resources from her about, you know, how do I grow in this area? And a lot of what I've learned has come from that. So I do think that getting coaching in leadership, whether it's at the elbow, just someone you work with who's an amazing coach or amazing leader, or it's from afar, and even if it's in a different discipline. But when I lived in Ann Arbor for 12 years, and we would go see a lot of baseball games in Detroit. And one of the coolest things about going to a baseball game was showing up 2 hours early and watching the best players in the country, players playing for Detroit or the Chicago White Sox or the Yankees, practicing, like literally working on how to swing a bat and hit a ball, something they do all the time and get paid a lot of money to do, and doing it with a coach behind them saying, oh yeah, you need to probably turn your hips this way better, working on fielding, working on throwing, stuff you think they've started when they were little tiny kids. But the point being that they understand the importance of practice, just like musicians understand. There isn't a world-class musician, Nabaya Garcia, a fantastic saxophonist, or Makaya McCraven, a wonderful drummer, who don't spend a lot of time in the shed just practicing. And I firmly believe we can do that with everything we do in medicine, including patient care. Obviously, we get better the more of it we do, and leadership, and teaching, and research, et cetera. So the fourth lesson that I want to talk about is getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. And I have to say, one of the slides I took out just because of time is about imposter syndrome, which is something that I think I and maybe some of you have suffered before, where you find yourself giving grand rounds at the University of Louisville, and you're thinking, what do I have to offer to teach people about leadership? And you know, I think anytime we have these opportunities to get uncomfortable, as long as we're safe, as long as these have a good purpose, it's important not to shy away from them. And one of the things as a division director or as a chair that we get to do is often deal with difficult issues that are affecting the people we serve, whether those are staff or learners or faculty. And fortunately, there are great resources to help us develop skills in that, because I can tell you when I became a division director, I was very conflict averse. I'm still not a huge fan of conflict, but I was conflict averse and didn't know any sort of basic approaches to how do I have a conversation with someone where, at least to that person, if not to both of us, the stakes are felt to be high, there may be differing views about the topic at hand, and it's easy to get very emotional about it. How do I handle that sort of thing? And these books, Crucial Conversations and Difficult Conversations, are really, really good at helping us develop fundamental approaches that then we can practice. We can practice that through role playing with peers. I did that a lot. When I was division director, my associate director of clinical affairs, her office was next to me. And anytime either of us had to have difficult conversations with somebody who wasn't one of us, we would practice. Come into my office and talk like, okay, do you think maybe I should say this? How does that, is it, and that was very helpful. I also think that we need to learn to create safety for people and have an open office and help people understand that they can trust us and that the things that are said are confidential unless the person we're talking to or the people we're talking to don't want it to be. But establishing trust, I think, is really, really important in that. And I wrote here, not only to not run from difficult conversations and uncomfortable things, but to reduce the lag time. And that's a big point in the Crucial Conversations book, is that, and many of you can relate to this, I'm sure, that if there's something going on that needs to be dealt with, the longer you wait to deal with it, the worse it often turns out to be. And so, and that's true in our personal life as much as it's true in our work life. And so that lag period between when you realize there's a problem and when you step into it or lean into it can be an important thing that we have power to modify. I want to spend a few slides talking about the importance of diversity to me as a leader, particularly as a white male leader, with all the privileges I talked about before. It is very clear from all sorts of research in the business world, in academics, in medicine, that having a diversity of experiences, expertise, however defined, that promotes lower levels of employee turnover, that persons who are in underrepresented populations are more likely to express interest in being part of an organization and perceive it as fair when they're highly represented in the leadership of that organization. And that's important for me because I'm in a position where I can hire leaders in my department. People experience less discrimination and less sexual harassment in inclusive workplace cultures. And it is undeniable, and I think pretty special, that diverse teams are more innovative, solve problems faster, and mixed gender teams better manage group conflict and better maximize creativity. In this book on the upper right, Range, the author David Epstein talks about the importance of within person diversity. In other words, making sure that we, as we grow, experience lots of different things because that informs our thinking and behaviors, but also the importance of teams being diverse. So a great example is that apparently there was a prize created for the general public if they could solve problems that experts in any field deemed unsolvable. And these experts, wherever they were found, NASA, pharmaceutical companies, academics, had to be willing to put everything they knew about the problem that they declared to be unsolvable into the public space. So maybe NASA said, like, this particular type of fuel could never be used to power a rocket, or a pharmaceutical company could say this drug, as it's formulated right here with this structure, is impossible to be orally bioavailable. Like, there's no way. And generally, the intractable, unsolvable problems were declared to be that by groups of people who were clearly experts in that field, but to a degree, not that diverse, because that's all they did. They were all rocket scientists or all drug developers. And according to them, this was unsolvable. And there's a prize, I don't know if it's $50,000 or $1 billion or whatever, but it would basically get outsourced to the world through the internet. And fascinatingly, what the author talks about in the book is something like 40 to 60% of these unsolvable problems get solved by people who are just kind of regular folks who might be able to think analogously better about a problem. In other words, you know what, this problem reminds me of something we do down at the post office. Or this problem reminds me of when I was a kid and we took baking soda and vinegar and mixed it together, whatever. But that ability to think analogously and come in from the side to problems is fascinating how it works. And so we can build that into our own teams and our own communities if we recognize that importance of diverse experiences. Also, I think we're getting more familiar and comfortable with studying in human health and disease, that when people are cared for by people that they trust, that share their experiences, that really matters. The data, I think, are better for Black physicians caring for Black patients, ranging in age from neonates through older adults. But I think we're going to continue to see these sorts of data emerging. And we know it in practical terms of everyday life, that we are often more comfortable when we're in relationships with people who we feel like they understand us better. And so for me, I think it's really important that when I'm assembling a team or hiring somebody, that a key value to that process is diversity, because it makes things better. It's not arbitrary. It's, you know, people sometimes speak poorly of diversity programs because it's just a way to check a box or something. We have to very deeply feel that that's not true. And if we hold diversity as a core value, we can evaluate the composition of our team through that lens and ask, do we have the right expertise, the right experience, the right lenses on this fill in the blank? And I would say that without it, teams become a bit more monofocal, and that's not optimal. One thing that I think all of us learned through the pandemic, I certainly did, is that taking care of ourselves is not an afterthought. I get paid to be a chair of medicine. I have to be able to do that at a high level. I want to be the best chair of medicine I can possibly be. So I can't perform at a high level. I can't be the best person I can be if I'm not taking care of myself, however defined: mental health, physical health, the things I love in my life, the people I love in my life, the animals I love in my life I need to feel whole. That helps me perform at a higher level. I'm sure that each of you have those days where you come into work and there are things that are troubling you that aren't necessarily part of your job. They may be outside of work, and that's not ideal because you're unfocused. You may be overtired. You may pull an all-nighter, or for whatever reason, just not be 100%. And that's not the best. So I think one of the things that we get paid to do in our job is to do it at a high level, which means one of the things we get paid to do is to care for ourselves and make sure, whether that's listening to music on the way into work or having a side conversation with somebody for 10 minutes or half an hour about something that is not job central. That feels good. It is good. It's helpful. These kinds of things. I tend to be somebody who tries at the end of the day to make sure I'm connecting with people through texting or emailing, whatever isn't a pain to them, to just check in with them. Say, hey, haven't heard from you in a while. How are you doing? There was somebody I met in my research life, and I lost touch with him for about 5 years. And last week I sent him an email out of the blue and said, hey, how are you? And that led to a Zoom call. He lives in another country. And it was wonderful. It was so great to reconnect. And so I think these things can be nurturing on both sides. I do want to spend some time talking about listening. I think that for me, that is fundamentally something that has become a very central part of the way that I lead. And when people ask my leadership style, I tell them that I lead with my ears. I really try to listen and gain information. And this point is about listening generatively, and I'll explain what I mean by that. So there's a researcher at MIT, I think he's still at MIT, named Otto Scharmer, who has thought a lot about listening and sort of categorized the ways that we listen into 4 different types of sort of expanding ways of listening. And one way, which is probably more common than we recognize, or maybe as common as we recognized, is called downloading, where basically all we're doing when we're listening to somebody is trying to hear the things that confirm our biases. We're trying to listen for facts that support our current thinking. The level 2 listening is called factual listening, where now we're open to all facts, and we're actually open to noting some facts that are a bit different from our opinion. And that's called listening with an open mind. Whereas when we listen, and while we're listening, we're really trying to put ourselves in the feet of the other person and try to listen from their perspective. That's empathic listening, because that's really what empathy is. And that's seeing through another person's eyes. And that's what Scharmer would say is listening with an open heart. I think the challenging one is generative listening, which is listening from a perspective of what the future could hold. And it's what Scharmer describes as an open will, connecting to an emerging future. And I'll talk about that in a future slide here. But the movement here is from evaluative listening, where we're just listening for facts and shelving them, to creating a future through our dialogue. So to break down some types of listening again, evaluative listening are the things like downloading, listening for things that we already know, or factual listening, having an open mind for facts that maybe they contradict what we already know, but that's all we want, are just the facts. We categorize things that we hear as good or bad. We agree with that. Oh yeah, I agree with that. Or I disagree with that. Oh, I like that. I dislike that. And a lot of what we do in those circumstances is while we're listening, we're also thinking of what we want to say next. What's our response? Oh, they said something I disagree with. I need to find that argument in the back of my head about why I disagree with that. And I'm going to bring that up to my face. And then when this person stops talking, I'm going to push it out of my mouth. That would be sort of evaluative listening. And I do that. Sometimes we all do that. That's a hard habit to break. Empathic listening is what you'd think. And it's really a lot about trying to understand someone's perspective. Where are they coming from? What is their story? If someone says something that we disagree with, why might a reasonable person feel differently than I'm feeling? What is it that their experience is telling them about why this is A and I think it's B? And I'm not trying to judge. I'm really trying to understand, like, how is it possible that this person, who's a very reasonable, rational person, views the world like this, and I view the world like that? And that's really listening in a humble way with an open heart. Generative listening is a little tough to explain, and it's kind of a different plane, but it's expanding the frame from dialogue of you and me to thinking collectively, as thinking about a community, thinking about us, and creating new possibilities for action that maybe neither parties had thought of or expected before the conversation. So they get into a conversation and new things emerge, and these integrate multiple perspectives and they kindle new solutions. We're shifting in this instance from trying to see the person's point of view or feel their experience to sensing what is becoming possible in the world around us as we share our opinions and we listen to each other. And we prioritize the subtle, very subtle sensing of what's emerging, and we tune in to how we can serve that future. So a great example would be in playing jazz with people, where something that I like to do, I don't do it well, but I like to try. And part of it is that it helps me think about these conversations I'm having with other musicians. I try to engage in active conversation through our instruments, and very much depends on listening and imagining what is possible in real time. And it's an opportunity to make mistakes that sometimes another musician will turn around and be like, whoa, where did that come from? and respond to each other. And this has been written about even this year, how jazz can unlock your team's next breakthrough, this sort of thinking this way. And the point of this article is that we should listen more to what's going on around us, play less, build on each other, and contribute to what is about to emerge. So how many of you play a musical instrument, even rudimentary level? A pretty good number, right? And one of the things that we often do when we're practicing is try to learn something. And then when we get in with other musicians, we want to display that or play it. And, you know, as opposed to just saying, oh, I've figured out this highly technical solo that I'm going to just insert here, it's thinking more about what have I just heard and how should I respond? And I think that is an example of generative listening. The next lesson beyond listening, I think, is a really important one. Again, it's been important for me to think about who I am. What's my character? And how do I build my character in such a way that other people know what I'm trying to be and how I behave? So I'm going to spend a few slides talking about character. And it's just something that I think gets underplayed in our development in our careers. And I would say character is, as the slide says, the foundation of all judgment and decision making. And this article from Dr. Crossan, Mary Crossan, was the first one that I think really put this into perspective for leaders in a very good way. And it helped me find a lot of back catalog on this topic of character building that was very helpful. So what do I mean by character? So character is our habits of thinking, our habits of cognition, emotion, and behavior that embody human excellence and produce social betterment. Our thinking, our feeling, our acting that go towards good. And our character is informed by our values, it's informed by our traits, and it's informed by our virtues. And I'll break down what I mean by those things because we can affect some of those. But these are all sort of in the soup of what makes our character. So values are the beliefs we have about what's important to us and what's worthwhile to us. So values influence our behavior because we seek more of the things that we value, the things that we want. If we value, you know, winning at a sport, that'll influence our behavior. Maybe we'll practice more at that. But it's also shaped by our social environment. We pick up our values from the people around us. What did our parents value? What did our religious leaders value? What did our politicians value? What do our colleagues value? We learn these. The values are often learned. And an important subset of values include those that have ethical or social dimensions. We value honesty. Most of your parents probably told you the importance of honesty as you were growing up. Integrity. We value compassion and fairness, charity and social responsibility. These are things we learn from other people around us. These are parts of our values. Traits are a little bit maybe more fixed. These are habitual patterns of thought, behavior, and emotion. They're relatively stable in individuals across situations and over time. So examples of traits are somebody who's just really thoughtful, very conscientious, someone who is very open to new experiences. Again, we can modify that, but you all know some people who are more open to experiences than other people, people who are more flexible, people who are more extrovert, or like one of our children is very introvert. And she's trying to become less introvert. So she's in college now and she's doing stand-up comedy and taking a public speaking course and doing things to try to get out of her shell a bit. Being empathic is a trait. You've met some people who are highly agreeable, some people who are highly disagreeable. These are traits. People who are highly neurotic, others who are not. And virtues, I'll spend a little bit of time on because these are sort of clusters of traits, values, and behaviors. Virtues are like behavioral habits, something that's exhibited really consistently. And back a little bit before most of us were born, Aristotle identified and defined 12 virtues: courage, temperance, generosity, magnificence, magnanimity, right ambition, good temper, friendliness, truthfulness, wit, justice, and practical wisdom. We probably could come up with other virtues. In fact, other people have come up with other virtues. But one of the things I like about Aristotle's approach to thinking about virtues is this idea of the golden mean of these virtues, right? That we want to behave in a way that puts us in kind of a sweet spot of these virtues, that we're just in, you know, the fable of Goldilocks, that we find the porridge that's the right temperature. And vices can occur when our virtue is deficient or in excess. And I can give examples of what's meant by that. So courage is a virtue. And if we lack courage, or we don't have enough of it in a circumstance where we should, that could be viewed as more of a cowardly approach. On the other hand, if somebody is really excessive in the courage front, that becomes reckless, right? And brazen and dysfunctional. Both are problematic. So how do we internally find that golden mean of a virtue? And one of the things that Mary Crossan and her colleagues proposed for leaders is a character framework where they identified 10 virtues that are important for leadership. And each of these characters, which are listed here on this slide, inform one of the most important virtues, which is our judgment. And I'll talk a little bit about judgment. But honestly, one of the things that each of us does every day is make decisions. Sometimes these are trivial decisions, like should I brush my teeth right now or wait till after breakfast? Maybe they're more important decisions. Should this patient be on this antibiotic? Or maybe it's, I think if I go this way, I'll get to work faster. But regardless, we have to make judgments constantly. You made a judgment to come to this talk, which you may now be regretting. I don't know. But these virtues are not only in this sort of golden mean Aristotelian balance with themselves, but they also influence each other. And Crossan does a great job that I can't really do of explaining that. But in this table are some examples of virtues or character dimensions, which are listed on the left side. So if we look at integrity at the bottom as a good example, the virtue of integrity is somebody who's authentic, candid, transparent, principled, consistent. Like these are things I would like to be, for sure. But if we're deficient in that, we may be fake, we may be untruthful, manipulative, unprincipled, and inconsistent. Or if we are excessive in our integrity, we're basically uncompromising or belligerent. It's my way or the highway. We're indiscriminate, dogmatic, rigid. You see, this idea, I think, is really important, and we can think about how each of these, in fact, on my laptop, the background screen on my laptop is this cartoon on the right, because I wanted to even subconsciously just get into my brain that these are character virtues that inform my ability to make better choices. And what the authors, Mary Crossan and others, say is that judgment is really the central piece of the way that we manifest our character. Because when we make a decision and somebody thinks we did that because we're selfish, or we did it because we're selfish, or we did it because we're being selfless, or we're trying to align it with the values of the people we serve, that's where our character comes out. So the choices we make minute by minute, day in and day out, in the micro moments between when we have a stimulus and when we make a response, is where our judgment needs to be informed. And Viktor Frankl, who was a Holocaust prisoner and survivor, later wrote that between stimulus and response, there's a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. And I think it's important for us to recognize that our judgments are not arbitrary. They're informed, whether we think about it or not. And they're informed by our character. And they're part of our character. And so, you know, how much drive we have, how much of a sense of justice we have, these things inform our choices. The penultimate lesson here is to foster a positive culture. Increasingly, I think that may be the most important thing that I'm tasked to do as a leader, is to inform a positive culture. And culture is created, reinforced, and transformed by leaders. So what do I mean by culture? Well, it's the essential elements of how an organization and its employees behave, including its governing beliefs and principles. It's a tacit, sort of unspoken social order of an organization that shapes attitudes and behaviors in wide-ranging and durable ways. And I would say it's the key ingredient, along with strategy and purpose, for achieving success in an organization. So culture is really the way things are done around here, right? And that can be very positive, or it can be very toxic. And I would say that the health of an organization's culture may be the most important ingredient for achieving goals and keeping employees engaged. And we see signs of healthy work culture all the time, and I hope that you see these on a daily basis. High employee retention, regular, honest, and transparent communications, people feeling safe, high levels of trust, diverse workforce, regular employee recognition, ongoing professional development, a clear vision and values, positive working relationships. And what follows from that is more innovation. Having accessible leadership teams, a healthy approach to well-being, less blame, more accountability, and empowered employees. Now, most groups don't have all of these functioning at champion levels. We struggle with these things. But when we are around a positive culture, wow, it feels really good. It's great. And I would argue that each of us in our own domains that we control can influence our culture on a regular basis, and we should. And there's ways to build a positive culture. I think as leaders, we need to learn more about change management, because often it's about taking a group of people and asking that group of people to focus on some new things or do something differently or change the culture. It's about being collaborative and cooperative, being inclusive, respectful, and diverse, fostering individual development without sacrificing a communal nature, keeping it enjoyable, and trusting one another. The last lesson, which again is one that as I'm in positions of being able to build leadership teams or hire people or help division directors decide who to hire or help administrative leaders decide who to hire, I think it's really important that we are creating teams of people that function at a high level. So we need to understand the key qualities of highly functional teams. We need to know what to look for in new team members or existing team members that predict, you know what, this person's going to be an awesome addition, or this person is functioning pretty well as a team member, but could use some work in some areas to help. And to create this positive culture, which I talked about, to help teams flourish. So 2 books that I recommend that I think they meet my criteria of books that I can recommend, which is that they're super easy to read. They're very easy to understand. And the messages resonate really well with most people. And they're both by an author named Patrick Lencioni. How many people here have read any of his work? Good, I see some hands. That's wonderful. The first book of his that I read was The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, and I'll talk about that book, but it's a lot about how do we create and nurture functional teams. The ideal team player is more about how do we pick teammates and how do we help our existing teammates do better. So I'm going to very briefly mention what these books are about. The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. So one of the things that Pat Lencioni's superpower is as an author is he uses fables, sort of made up stories, to illustrate the points. And in this book, he outlines 5 critical elements of a successful team that when any of these are lacking, they really disable the ability to succeed. And he's brilliant at helping us as the reader understand that point of why these relate to each other. And at the very foundation is trust. And not trust in sort of a predictive way, like when somebody says they're going to do something, I trust that they're going to do it. But more about trusting people in a more vulnerable way of knowing that that we really have a deep commitment to working together to achieve shared results. And I trust that when you criticize what I'm doing or you disagree with me, that you're doing that in a sense out of love. You're doing that because you're trying to help us be better together to achieve success. And so I don't take your criticism as an insult or a dig. I take it as you trying to help me hammer this piece of bronze into a beautiful symbol, right? I take this as hard work that we're doing together, which gets into this other area of fear of conflict. He makes the point that meetings where groups of people are trying to achieve shared goals should have conflict in them. I disagree with that. Or here's an idea, what do you all think? Well, explain that more, I don't get it. But that needs to be rooted in trust. People need to be committed to decisions that are made in meetings where ideas are hammered out of conflict. And so all of the leaders at the end of the day can commit to a plan because they've all been heard, they've all been understood. And while the committed plan might be different than what they really thought they wanted, they're good to go with it. And they'll then be willing to hold each other accountable for executing on those plans and focusing on the results. About the ideal team player of picking people for your team, it's obvious stuff. It's picking people who Lencioni says are smart, hungry, and humble. But what does that mean? Well, humble speaks for itself, right? People who are not ego-driven narcissists who are in it for themselves. Being hungry are the people who go a little bit extra. They're eager. They want to help. They do the job and then some. Not the folks that say, what's the bare minimum I need to do because I'm out of here, right? And not the people, to think in this sort of Aristotelian view, are so eager to do stuff that they burn out and they work too hard on something, right? But it's that ability to be hungry to achieve and work together and be excited to come to work. And then smart isn't intelligence about a problem. It's not being the brilliant rocket scientist. It's having people smarts. It's being able to relate to your teammates and relate to other people and read the room and empathize and be a good listener. That's really important. That's what he's talking about in that book. So to summarize these 10 points, I really think leadership can be learned. I think we can continuously self-improve. I think we can and should practice and learn from people. We should be uncomfortable sometimes and get comfortable being uncomfortable. That's okay. And we're going to screw up sometimes, and that's all right. Diversity needs to, in our core, be as important as oxygen. Self-care matters. It matters to me how I repair, regenerate, renew. It's important to listen and try to take our listening to a higher level and not always be evaluative in the way that we listen. To build our character, to figure out, like, where do I sit on some of these values and virtues?
Your sound is.
And know how to foster a positive culture and assemble great teams to sit in that culture and do great things. So leadership is a journey, it never ends. Everyone leads, everyone should work on their leadership skills. We should learn from observing others. We should get mentors and we should be a student. I'm going to say thank you. I'm also going to say that today is my daughter Ren's birthday. And so that reminds me to also call her today and wish her a happy birthday. I have to do that. But thank you. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, David. That was really remarkable. There's just a lot to think about. In my own path to leadership, I would always say that pretty much everything I needed to know to be a leader in medicine or department chair, I learned coaching Little League.
Yeah.
And people laugh, but you think about it, you're building a team, you're assessing skills, you're deploying people where they can help the team the most. But one of the things that I have found in not just Little League, but in medicine is that sometimes we have to go away from that model of putting people where they can help you the most, because you kind of need to help them. And so one of the things we struggle with when we're building a team and trying to get the most function out of it is the difference between short and long-term success.
Yeah.
And so you could build yourself a team around you full of people who are highly skilled at what you need them to help you with right now. And then you're not building for the future. And so how do you deal with this sort of the time course of mentoring and building, putting people in uncomfortable situations, hoping that they will respond over time? How do you deal with that?
So Dr. Williams has asked a question that is really tough. And that's why you asked the question. And as a respected leader, if you're wrestling with it, it's a tough question of how you bring people into your team for some short-term things that you're pretty comfortable they can do, but there's longer-term issues for them and things that they need to grow with. And personally, I think a lot of it has to do with the people who I lead or ask of to do things. I need to know deeply that I know what they want to do in the next 6 months or a year, and I know where they want to be 3 to 5 years from now. I think that for me helps, because I do think that we owe it as leaders to position people not just to come in and turn cranks without a future vision, but to come in and do the job at hand, but know that they're in a supportive environment to themselves grow. And that's where Rhonda Montgomery's work around botany is really, I think, useful to think about, that we tend plants that eventually outgrow their pot, or we need to prune them in such ways that we get the fruits that we want. And we need to be thinking in longer term and about the people that we serve. And so one of the things I'm spending a lot of time right now on is employee engagement. And part of that has to do with making sure that the people who work with me and for me know that they're not anonymous to me. And I know about them outside of work. I know what drives them, and I know where they want to head, and that we have a trusting relationship, so that if I say to them, I'm noticing this area where I think you would be even able to perform at a higher level if we could work on this together. It's not something we need to do next week, but it's something that I'd like to hear your point of view in. Would you be interested in building these chops or working on these skills over the next 6 months or a year, and then figure out how to do that? But it's hard because we get judged on short-term gains, right? And that's I think what makes it hard. Decisions are often made about the next quarter and not about 5 years from now. And this is, I think, existential in healthcare or sick care in our country, is that we can take care of people who right now are having a heart attack, right? But how do we invest resources into children so that when they're 60, they're not having that heart attack? And there's not as much of an eagerness, because people are like, well, that's somebody else's problem. I'm being tasked to figure out how to treat a heart attack right now, So it's a great question. I don't know that I have a good answer for it.
So I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more about generative listening in healthcare, because I think often we go into a patient's room and we're not using that phase of listening. And can that generative listening be taught, or are there exercises that you found helpful that you have brought to the bedside with clinical care?
Yeah, a really good question about listening at the bedside. And I think listening at the bedside is very complicated, because on the one hand, especially when we're a bit tired, we focus so much on facts. Just, we have inner dialogues of like, this patient is talking about stuff that's not what I need in my H&P. Like, I want to know, when did this shortness of breath start? So I think whether we can be more empathetic listeners or generative listeners is the challenge for us at the bedside, is to be thinking empathically about our patient's position and understanding their perspectives. The generative part is usually very circumstantial, around thinking about ways that we could imagine a better future for them with things that maybe we can do to help them. And sometimes that's about anticipating, based on what they're saying, resources that they or their family might need or something. That may be an example of where we're thinking a little bit outside of just the two of us and thinking more collectively about what sort of things, social determinants of health are playing a role, that then later we can have a sidebar conversation with somebody else about what I learned from listening to this patient. But yeah, it's a good question. I don't know that I have a great answer for specifically generative listening. I think one of the things that we need to first get to is empathic listening with our patients.
I think we have an itinerary today we need to keep to. But
Oh, I'm sorry to be short on.
Yeah.
Oh, is there a question from the chat? Do we have time?
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, so our quick question from the chat. I think this is right up Dr. Williams' alley here. It's from Dr. Robert Emmons from our HEMOC, our BMT group. He says, how will the tools of AI change leadership? What AI tools should leaders use and what should they avoid? How should leaders include AI into careers of others?
Well, I'm going to keep that answer short because I don't know the answer to that question. I think all of us are trying to figure out where AI is going to help us. So I don't know. Let me think about that answer, and maybe that's another. That'll be the 11th point in my next talk. But I don't know. Yeah.
Okay, before you part, we want to give you this.
Whoa.
A Louisville Slugger.
Oh my gosh.
Your name on it, Medicine Grand Rounds, UofL. and
Oh my
that's it.
gosh. Thank you. Wow. Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Williams. Yeah. You know, as a longtime baseball fan and with a son who played baseball for many years too, it's great. I think baseball is a great way to learn leadership skills, as Dr. Williams said. I've toured the Louisville Slugger factory 3 times. I love it. This time I just have a day here, so I'm not, but I guarantee if I was here till tomorrow, I would be touring that place. It's magic. So thank you.
So good thing you drove because they don't allow you on